Good afternoon readers, it's Tilly here from Tilly's Shelf, and today I'm going to do a quick wrap up of the books that I read in June, which wasn't that many. I'm hoping it's going to be a short wrap up. I'm aiming to do less than a minute per book because when I tried to film this earlier on I just rambled, and that wasn't a very interesting video. So I will just say this is a new filming location. This is the smallest room in our house. It used to be our bedroom. It's now a kind of like a craft room, cozy reading nook kind of thing, which is kind of a project that we've been working on at the times when I've been home to make a nice space. So I'm still trying to work out exactly a good location to fit the filming into this, if that makes sense. So let's, without further ado, plunge into the books that I have read in June. So the first book that I finished was Borderland by Reid, and I read that one on the Kindle. So the subtitle to this is A Journey Through the History of Ukraine. And this is basically a book where Reid has gone and travelled through different regions of Ukraine. Most of it was written in the 1990s, and then she reviewed what she wrote in around 2014, just after the events of the Maidan protests and the conflict that emerged following on from that. I would say that section at the end where she goes into the new soul of Ukraine that emerged at that point is definitely the best section of the book. I found some of the earlier sections sometimes a little bit frustrating or upsetting because I didn't feel that it reflected the Ukraine that sort of we know today. And I found that at times a little bit difficult to read because it was almost like she didn't have that much faith in Ukraine as a country. I read this, actually it took me from November until June to read, so a very long time. I was kind of dipping in and out, and I started to read it because I had previously just finished this book, which is Black Earth, A Journey Through Ukraine by Jens Muhling. And yeah, again, I had a similar problem with this book. Because Jens Muhling even starts by saying that he didn't really think of Ukraine as a real place. And this one is 2019, and I think, and revised in 2022. And yeah, in both cases, I think the revisions have a lot more recognition for the country of Ukraine that I think we would more recognise in the present day. And obviously that's gone through a lot of changes. So I'm already rambling a little bit too much, but that was the first book that I finished. After that I had some time where I was travelling and I had the Kindle, but I didn't really have access to anything else, so I read a few more things on the Kindle, and they were just ones that I already had downloaded, rather than ones that I specifically kind of chose to read. I was very interested to read The White Guard by Mikhail Bulgakov, and this is one of the ones from the 19-teens. So this book it's set in Kiev, or at the time Kiev, and it focuses on that moment when a lot of different armies are surrounding Kiev as a city and trying to take control of it. It's a very good representation of how war affects civilians, or how war affects normal people, because you have all of these, it focuses on one family and their associates, and you have all of these young men kind of trying to decide how to react, how to join up. It really it tells you a lot about the confusion of war, the conflicting messages, the conflicting goals, I suppose, or like the decisions that people have to make in almost like a few seconds, where they have to decide, is this the moment when I stand and hold the gun and decide whether or not to kill someone, or is this the moment when I run away because because of the value of my life versus the likelihood of success in this. And yeah, it's very interesting to see how those characters are affected by that situation. I would consider doing a longer review of this and talk a little bit about the different characters, the use of kind of clock symbolism in particular, and the way that it kind of reflects on future changes that happened in Kiev. But yeah, I won't talk about it too much just right now. I will say, because a commenter asked me to say at one point, or mentioned it, that Mikhail Bulgakov, as an author, he viewed Ukraine as being part of Russia, and he didn't recognise Ukraine as an independent place. So it's worth bearing in mind when you read it that the politics of it align with sort of Russian imperialism rather than Ukrainian nationalism, I suppose. Then the final book that I read on the Kindle was completely different, very much more light-hearted, and that was The Book Club by C.J. Cooper. I have a feeling that Ros might have read this for her own book club, and I feel like I might have discussed it with her, but it just happened to be downloaded onto the Kindle. For some reason it was coming up on the front page of my library, presumably because somebody else who's on the family Kindle thing had been reading it recently. Yeah, it was fun, but it was not all that, I suppose. So it's about a young woman who has moved into a small village to escape kind of the relationship drama that she's been having in London, and then another woman moves in next door who seems to know like a weird amount of stuff about her, and the other woman decides that they're going to set up a book club, and every book that they read in some way relates to the other characters. I would say this is very much like a Northanger Abbey type book. I've got my copy of Northanger Abbey there, ready for Jane Austen July. In that, in Northanger Abbey, Jane Austen makes this really like catty comment about other writers always making their heroines read great works of literature rather than having them read novels, and it's the same in the book club. Like, instead of them reading, this is a crime, kind of like a crime why done it kind of thing, but instead of the characters reading other crime books, they're only reading classics. It's a good book to read if you like reading classics but you're looking for an easy read, I suppose. It's a book that's probably a lot more enjoyable if you do know what happens in Madame Bovary or what happens in I'm trying to think of one of the other ones that they read now. Jane Eyre, for instance. This is the second book that I've read this year that abides by what we can call the Jane Eyre rule, which I've got The Secrets of Hartwood Hall here by Katie Lumsden. I didn't read this in June, I read it, I think it was in April, but Katie says her husband pointed out that if you write a book that refers to like the Bronte sisters and refers to Jane Eyre, something has to get burned down, and that rule is definitely replicated in the book club, particularly if it's a story that talks about Jane Eyre, but also talks about kind of extramarital affairs and scandalous things like that. Something has to get burned down. That's probably the only good thing about this book. No, I enjoyed it, but it just doesn't have that much depth. And I would say it's very much an example of modern crime writing, in that every time I love reading murder mystery type books, but every time I read a modern one these days, I find that they're all written just about the same, and you can kind of, you know what to expect from how they're going to construct their sentences and things. It's just not very, the writing isn't really a highlight, but I guess it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be like a beach read. So that was The Book Club by C.J. Cooper. Then I did have a couple of books that I read in paper copy that I haven't yet mentioned, and that was two books that I bought new this month, and I actually finished reading them this month, so I think I deserve a gold star for that, buying books and reading them as well. So I already mentioned in my mid-year book freak out tag this book by Yeats, A Terrible Beauty is Born. So it's a collection of his poems put together by Penguin Little Black Classics, and I bought it when I was in Dublin, very briefly, and I just wanted to highlight one phrase, I suppose, because it fits into some of the other, it's kind of like a reference within the works. Yeats writes in a poem called Adam's Curse, "A line will take us hours maybe, yet if it does not seem a moment's thought, our stitching and unstitching has been naught. Better go down upon your marrow bones and scrub a kitchen pavement, or break stones like an old pauper in all kinds of weather. For to articulate sweet sounds together is to work harder than all these, and yet be thought an idler by the noisy set of bankers, schoolmasters and clergymen, the martyrs call the world." And it's interesting because in The White Guard there is a line where the characters are trying to distract themselves from the conflict and various bad things happening as a result of the conflict, and they decide to play a card game, and one of them kind of gets frustrated with another one and shouts, "You have to use your head, you know, this isn't like writing poetry." So I liked how those two kind of quotes complemented one another, I suppose. And just to give you an example of one of the lines or one of the poems that Yeats could have been referring to when he's saying that a line needs to seem like just a moment's thought, or like it just fits together naturally, I'll just briefly read for you He Wishes for the Cloths of Heaven, which I think is one of his most famous poems, but it just remains really a beautiful poem. So he says, "Had I the heavens embroidered cloths, enwrought with golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of night and light and the half-light, I would spread the cloths under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I have spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams." It's just a beautiful poem, and I actually was really surprised by how many of these poems I really enjoyed and liked and feel like I would come back to. So the other book that I read in paper copy this month, I also mentioned just recently in the mid-year freakout tag, You Don't Know What War Is by Yeva Skalietska. This only took me about 2 days to read, not just because the writing is quite simple and some pages are just, these are some text messages that she exchanged with her friends, so you can kind of flow through that quite quickly, but because it is quite gripping, I suppose. So this is, Yeva Skalietska had just turned 12 when the conflict, the escalation of the conflict occurred. She was living in Hartwood, and she was keeping a diary. So this covers the first, well, I think it goes up to day 67 of the war, but not a daily entry after the first few weeks. This covers her experience of sheltering in basements. It covers her experience of travelling west through Ukraine into Romania, and actually finding a host family in Dublin who she was able to move to with her grandmother, thanks to the help of some Channel 4 news reporters, which is interesting because I thought journalists weren't really supposed to intervene, I suppose, but in this case, obviously, maybe they felt that the situation was slightly different. Obviously, what they've done for Yeva and her grandmother is fantastic, in that Yeva now has a new life in Dublin, and at the end of the book she kind of writes about starting her new school and starting to make new friends, and I guess finding a sense of normality again, even though she's lost all of the friends that she's left behind. One thing that I like is that it has a little bit, a very short section where it has stories of her different friends, so you can see from a few different 12-year-old perspectives how the first weeks of the conflict in Kharkiv played out, and the how each different family adapted in a slightly different way, but generally with the theme of needing to move away from that area quite rapidly. Yeah, I really didn't I didn't know anything about this before I picked it up, but when I saw it I knew that I really wanted to read it, and it's, I think, one of the best non-fiction books that I've read about Ukraine, because it really captures those first few days, and Yeva is a very strong narrator. Even though she's 12, she puts things very, and maybe because she's 12 she puts things very clearly. I think there's one line where she writes, "My soul is screaming," when she's sheltering in the basement, hearing missiles surrounding her, and it really helps you, I suppose, to empathise and to understand the situation that people have come out of. And also, as a young woman who was learning English, I think it also kind of helps to illustrate the reason that not just people from Ukraine, but the reason that a lot of people have, and she says she doesn't like being called a refugee, so a lot of people, I will say, have for wanting to come to sort of the British Isles, is the fact that, you know, as a colonial language, a lot of people do speak English or learn English in school, and that makes it a natural place that people want to come to, because they felt that they could more quickly establish a life in this area than in France, because they didn't speak any French, for instance. So that was the 2 paper books that I finished this month. And then finally I had one audiobook that I finished, which is, well, I didn't finish it, so I'm listening to the complete works of the complete Sherlock Holmes, narrated by Stephen Fry on audiobook, and yeah, I finished the last of the major works this month. I have just still a few of the short stories to go. So I finished The Valley of Fear and His Last Vow, which I have in paper copy, secondhand, as you can see from the sticker on the front. And yeah, I can't really describe how big of a thing Sherlock Holmes has been for me in the last few months. I've been away from home a lot, and every time I need to go to sleep when I'm away from home, I normally put on Sherlock Holmes as an audiobook. It's narrated by Stephen Fry. He's got this really nice soothing voice, and I've just been listening to it as I fall asleep almost every night. It's kept me company through some difficult nights, I would say, and yeah, I'm finally getting to the end of it, and I'm on the one hand like really desperate to finally get to the end, and on the other kind of sad that I'm going to be missing that now, but I'm staying at home for a while, so I won't need it as much. Okay, so that was my wrap up for June. Let me know if you've read any of these books. Thank you very much for watching. Yeah, let me know any thoughts, and bring on Jane Austen in July.